Now let's take a look at the scenario where we want to restore an Exchange Server 2013 database using Windows Server Backup. Now first I'm just going to set the scene a little bit here. In my Windows Server Backup console, you can see my last successful backup was on this date at 8:16 p.m. And what I can also do is use PowerShell to verify that using get mailbox database and the status switch. And let's just have a look at the database names and last full backup timestamp. We can see those timestamps match, so all of my databases were backed up at 8:16 p.m. Now, just over an hour has passed since that backup was taken. And let's have a look at one of the mailbox users. And this mailbox user is Sarah Baker, and she is located on the database DB2. So this is Sarah Baker's mailbox logged on using Outlook Web App. And I'm using Outlook Web App so that there's no confusion during this demonstration about any Outlook cache mode behavior that may prevent emails from being lost. I want to be absolutely sure that we're seeing what really happens in a database recovery scenario. So Sarah has received emails at 8:43 p.m, 9:25 p.m. In other words, she's received email after the backup was taken. So these 4 or 5 messages here were not included in that backup that completed at 8:16 p.m. So these items would be at risk if there was some sort of problem with the database and we had to restore from backup. So let's go ahead and cause a problem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to simply delete that database file so that we have no choice but to restore it from backup. So jumping back to the server. Now, I can't just go ahead and delete the file. The file will be locked. It will be in use by the Exchange services. So I'm going to dismount that database first. And go into Windows Explorer and delete the file. So that file is gone, and we'll leave the transaction logs behind because those transaction logs, or the availability of those transaction logs for the restore process, will allow us to recover the database all the way up to the point in time at which the database file was lost. So we'll still be able to recover the emails that were received after the backup was taken. And if you're not sure what I mean, it'll make a lot more sense when you actually see the database recovery in action. So, in Windows Server Backup, let's start a recovery. Now my backups are stored on this server, and I can see the available backup at 8:16 p.m. and that's the one I'm going to choose to recover from. And the type of recovery that we want to perform in this case is an application recovery. This is how Windows Server Backup restores applications such as Exchange Server 2013. There's the application called Exchange, and we can view the details there. And these are the GUIDs of each of my mailbox databases, DB1, DB2, and my archive database. Now, a limitation of Windows Server Backup is that when we're performing an application recovery, we have no choice but to restore all of these databases that are in the backup set. We can't just selectively restore DB2, for example. Now, the downside of that is that the other databases will also need to be taken offline. The recovery process will run, and then they'll be brought back online, which means that those databases will have an outage for those users while this restore is taking place. But on the upside, because their transaction logs are still available, no data will actually be lost. So the backup will be restored from the point in time at which the backup was taken, and then the transaction log files that are still available on the server will be replayed to bring the database back up to date. So that'll happen for all three of the databases, not just the one we want to recover. Of course, we want to recover to the original location. And when we're ready to begin, just click the recover button. And away we go. Now this recovery will take a little bit of time depending on the speed of your server and the size of your databases. So we're going to skip ahead to when that process is complete, and then we'll have a look at the results. Well, this recovery is now complete. You can see the amount of data that was restored there. So let's jump back over to Sarah Baker's mailbox, and we'll just refresh this. We can see that nothing's changed. Those items are still available. So the recovery brought back not just the database as of the time of 8:16 PM when the backup was taken, but also, thanks to that transaction log replay, all of the changes that had occurred in that mailbox since then. So these 5 mailbox items were still preserved in that recovery process. As we come back to the server, we can actually just have a closer look at exactly what happened during that restore. So in the event viewer, we'll jump over to the application log. So we can see there's a backup event here where the operation to recover these databases, these are the database GUIDs, was attempted. This MS Exchange replication event tells us that the Exchange replication service, VSS Writer, will restore a backup set to database DB2. So that's the beginning of the restore of that particular database. We have another event shortly after to say that the replication service successfully restored the backup set. And now, in order to bring the restored database to a clean shutdown state, database recovery will be performed. Another event to let us know that database recovery will take place. A log file integrity check is performed on the log files that are located on our logging volume. Remembering our log files were still available, they weren't lost when the database file was lost. And now we have these logging recovery events. As we see, the database engine is initiating recovery steps. So at this point, what it's actually doing is playing in or replaying those log files found in the transaction log directory into the database to bring it back up to date to the point in time at which the database was lost. So just to reiterate that point, restoring from backup restores the database at the point in time at which the backup was taken. And then this logging recovery process replays the other transaction logs that are still on the server into the database to bring it back up to date so that no data is lost. And depending on how many transaction log files are, this process could take a few minutes or it could take much longer. And then what we're looking for at the end is an event that lets us know that the database was successfully mounted. And there we have it. Now that same process of restoring the database and then going through this logging recovery process occurred for each of the databases. So all three of those databases in the backup set each went through this process one after the other to bring them all back up to date and bring them online. And that is how we use Windows Server Backup to recover an Exchange 2013 mailbox database.